The Allosaurus, thanks to its size and ferocity, is an icon of the Jurassic. The two go hand in hand, and many dub it to be the king of those times. However, Allosaurus wasn't the only large theropod on the block, and one in particular not only lived alongside it, but also rivaled it in many ways, despite being largely forgotten about: the Torvosaurus. The Torvosaurus possessed a potent arsenal of lethal weapons that allowed it to be a dominant force in its own regard, but most consider its top challenging trait to be its size. Long has there been debate on what the largest Jurassic theropod was, and Torvosaurus' ginormous stature has made it a standout contender, with certain groups of paleontologists even considering it to be the largest of them all. It was composed of two species, Tannery and Gurney, with the former being the North American species and the latter the European. Both species were incredibly large, usually being estimated to have been between 10 and 9 meters, or 30 and 33 feet in length, and the North American version has been claimed to have grown even bigger, at 12 or 39 feet, although this is most likely a dubious claim, as it is based off of incomplete remains and cross-examining other theropods. At the commonly projected length, the Torvosaurus was fairly equal to the Allosaurus, though slightly smaller than the Saurophaganax, another giant Jurassic theropod that some consider to maybe have actually been large Allosauruses. However, the base of the Torvosaurus' claim for the title of being the largest Jurassic carnivore was not necessarily its length, rather its weight. Compared to many predators of the time, the Torvosaurus was heavily built, resulting in it weighing anywhere from 3.6 to 4.5 metric tons, making it fairly heavier than Allosaurus on average, albeit in recent times, it appears that Saurophaganax may have also had an edge in the weight department, possibly weighing over 5 tons, but debates still persist. And even if it wasn't the number one largest, the Torvosaurus was still without a doubt a top dog in its environment, and held its own, and not to mention was unique, as it belonged to the Megalosauridae family, being one of the last to live and possibly the largest, setting it apart from the Allosaurus and Saurophaganax, as both hailed from the Allosauridae family. And in regards to its other assets, the Torvosaurus, for starters, possessed an impressive jaw. It bore an elongated and narrow snout that was still very robust and would have been crammed with muscles, allowing it to pack quite the killer bite. In fact, one study estimated its bite force as being 3 times that of the American alligator, which would have allowed it to easily crush through its prey with its curved and rather long teeth. And the jaw is also important, as it's where the major difference between the two Torvosaurus species is found, because when analyzing the skulls and mouth, paleontologists found that Torvosaurus tannery had the most teeth between the two species and held a slightly different skull shape, yet both were still extremely deadly. The power behind its bite not only helped the Torvosaurus with prey, but may have been a deterrent to other predators, as it's heavily thought to have possessed the strongest bite force in its environment. Although this doesn't necessarily mean it was the deadliest, but nevertheless made it one to not be trifled with. And if its bite failed, the Torvosaurus also sported another killer weapon, its arms. They were not long per se, but held vast power thanks to their thick and strong bones and muscles, which let the Torvosaurus wield its arms in a vicious manner. Additionally, it is believed by some to have had a giant enlarged claw that was attached to its thumb that it could use to dispatch prey, which is presumed to have consisted of plated dinosaurs like the Stegosaurus and juvenile sauropods, as the longnecks were rather plentiful in many of its habitats. Along with this conjecture, another idea proposes that the claw was mainly used for fights with other carnivores. These two assumptions together make up the majority of beliefs on the usage of the claw, but some paleontologists think that its claws and bite were actually only used for already deceased animals. This hypothesis is due to the large size of Torvosaurus and its heavy build, which may have rendered it to be quite slow, leading to a portion of scientists believing that it was not an active hunter, rather a scavenger that operated by relying on other theropods to bring down prey and proceeding to scare them off, thus securing itself a free meal. This tactic, if true, may have led to the occasional violent confrontation, potentially even with the Allosaurus. The conclusion of such a standoff between a Torvosaurus and Allosaurus is hard to determine, as both were capable of inflicting fatal blows, and may have also been dependent on if the high numbers of Allosaurus being found in close vicinity to each other meant they cooperated in packs attacks, as that would not be optimal for the Torvosaurus. And even if Torvosaurus didn't purely scavenge, as most do presume it was also a hunter, there's still a good chance it ran into the Allosaurus here and there, considering they coexisted. However, and possibly for the best, paleontologists think it is most likely that neither wanted any problems and usually avoided each other. Additionally, this belief of a quote-unquote peaceful coexistence also seems more plausible, as Allosaurus wasn't the only theropod that Torvosaurus lived alongside. It roamed the lands in a theropod-rich period during the Middle and Late Jurassic, specifically from 165 to 148 million years ago, and the Torvosaurus encountered many of the plentiful carnivores, especially since it was a resident of both North America and Europe, which wasn't that uncommon as the two continents were much closer at that point in time. Because of this wide range throughout the globe, the Torvosaurus's fellow theropods included the Allosaurus, Ceratosaurus, and Saurophaganax in the United States, and in Europe, another Allosaurus species as well as Ceratosaurus was present, though a newcomer, the Lorrainosaurus, also inhabited Europe. With this high propensity, one may assume a lot of dinosaur fights, but it seems that they each were separated by their own ecological niches, with the Torvosaurus preferring waterways and forested areas, where many of its remains have been located. Its affinity for a forest may be due to its slow speed, as vegetation would allow for better ambushes. However, the Morrison Formation, located in Colorado and Wyoming, represents what was one of the Torvosaurus's habitat, and remains here do show that it did live in some areas directly with other predators, in this case the Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus, though in these shared environments the number of Torvosaurus were less abundant, suggesting that living side by side was the exception, not the rule. In habitats like these, where Torvosaurus lived in close contact with other carnivores, paleontologists point to its skull to explain how it retained the status of apex predator, as no carnivore is known to have readily preyed on it. The Torvosaurus, as mentioned, had a powerful bite, more so than that of Allosaurus and Ceratosaurus, as well as sporting different teeth, indicating that it maybe had different dietary preferences, which could have applied to carcasses. This was quite useful, since if multiple theropods were scavenging, conflicts could be avoided, as Torvosaurus's teeth and power made it better at accessing certain parts of the herbivore, while other carnivores would select other cuts of meat, so to speak. A potential dietary difference would also be a huge help during rough conditions, which are noted to have been quite abundant during the late Jurassic, where arid conditions and droughts plagued the Torvosaurus's habitat, especially in its North American range. And despite the large amount of theropods, they were by no means the only residents, as other dinosaurs in its North American habitat included Apatosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Diplodocus, Barosaurus, Supersaurus, Camarasaurus, Camptosaurus, Dryosaurus, Ornitholestes, and Stegosaurus. The fauna of its European homeland appears to have been less rich than North America, but still very diverse, as it included Stegosaurus, Marigaya, Dracopelta, Lusa-Titan, Dinhyrosaurus, and Draconix. Additionally, as the European site was more coastal, sharks, turtles, and crocodilomorphs are also believed to have been present. The Torvosaurus would have most likely have been the unchallenged ruler of the European lands that mainly consisted of present-day Portugal, as it was definitely larger than other theropods, including the Allosaurus, as the Allosaurus species in Portugal was smaller than its North American counterpart. And regarding North America, it's hard to say who the true king was, although in terms of pure numbers, the Allosaurus did hold an edge over Torvosaurus, perhaps suggesting it was better suited for those times. However, this shouldn't take away from the Torvosaurus, who was a beast in many other ways and definitely deserves more attention, as it has unfortunately become overshadowed.